I need to remember to Photoshop that poster. Need to turn it into a romantic comedy. It needs to be done.
Oh, it does kind of look like it could be.
Yeah.
Put an idyllic background in there.
Yes.
Or just like an office, like a workplace sort of rom-com.
Yeah, it could be. Thinking of like a Florida beach, but
that would be good too. Yeah, I was thinking you'd have to put shirts on them for an office. Yeah, Florida beach. Maybe I don't know. What's the reason for their dispute? Because obviously the poster is showing us the low point of the movie. This is a real When Harry Met Sally. Lots of conflict between the lovers.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm struggling to come up with a name. Because you can come up with standard romance novel names, but it seems like it should be quirkier than that.
Yeah. Mixed martial hearts.
That's a pretty good one. Yeah, I was also thinking like Caged Hearts, but that's too dramatic.
Yeah, that sounds like a Fabio bodice ripper romance novel.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be silly. It's got to be like
or
like Double Team, or I don't know.
I mean, I could call it Split Decision, but
ooh, you know what? That's a pretty good one.
Yeah, but the problem is I want to use Decision for the tagline, one of the taglines. Like, it can be like, he was an all-American, for like Colby, it can be like, he was an all-American bully who just wanted to be all-loved, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the Cuban bad boy with a history of bad decisions. I can't let that line go.
Yeah, I think Split Decision's a pretty good title, though, because it puts me in mind of, you could Photoshop an annoying child in the middle of the poster, and then it becomes like a divorce rom-com.
Yeah.
It's like a custody battle over their adopted son. Or you put like another annoying comic character in the background that is like a lover who's like had an affair with the both of them.
Mm-hmm.
But who is just like a completely over-the-top comic character. And they're like fighting over their shared affair with this person. Split Decision, the idea of them being a couple on the outs, I think is the idea. That also explains the angry looks. That's a good one. It might rob the tagline, but it's a good one.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss that tagline if I do it.
Yeah, or it could be a divorce one. Split Decision. You could also throw a judge in there. If it's a divorce court rom-com.
Mm.
This is a rich ground. I kind of want. I kind of want to like write up a premise for this movie now. It's a fertile ground. This poster is the black Ukrainian soil of MMA rom-coms. Hello, one and all, and welcome to the latest edition of Heavy Hands. Unless, of course, you're listening to this next week or any other time in the future, in which case it is no longer the latest edition of Heavy Hands. I'll probably be dead by then, too. So I was your host, Connor Rebush. With me, I assume he is in a bloody coup, taking over the show by now, for you future listeners, is Phil McKenzie. Phil? You calculating any nefarious plans over there?
What way are we looking at you dying this time? A nuclear response from Russia? Any new pandemics we should be worried about?
Yeah, I've got a couple planned.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as long as they ignore the most important place in the world, England, we'll be fine.
You guys have enough diseases.
Admittedly, people might be... The majority of our listener base might be sort of struggling to listen as the electromagnetic fallout cooks all of their favorite, like, streaming and audio services. But, Those of you who remain.
Yeah. On the bright side, for old Blighty, it's just the classic scurvy you have to worry about. Everything else is it's normal.
Oh yeah, we've been having Pancake Day today, which is where we eat crepes.
Oh my god! Why do you fuck everything up?
To upset you.
Pancake Day is when you eat crepes.
Yeah. Delicious crepes.
Oh my god! If you put a crepe inside of a potato bun, what do you call that? A pancake burger? You fucking degenerate.
Undoubtedly. And what you call pancakes, we call splodgers, due to the way that they go out on the pan. We call crepes pancakes.
Please tell me. Actually, I don't want to find out. Don't tell me if you actually call them splashers. It's too credible. I'm going to take it at face value and assume that it's true. Welcome to Heavy Hands. We're talking about UFC 272 on this week's episode. We're going to do some boxing at some point here, Phil. At some point, the UFC schedule is going to take another dip, I think, and we'll have to introduce some other combat sports for variety and fun. Maybe some kickboxing. But for the time being, sticking to the UFC schedule, because we've got a pay-per-view that I'm happy to say has gotten more and more interesting to me as I have started evaluating it as an actual card of fights and not just that thing that all the most annoying people on MMA Twitter are talking about. I don't care about the conflict, the interpersonal beef between Masvidal and Covington. In fact, I don't care about it so much that I sort of do care about it, in that I hate it, and it's annoying to me. But as a matchup, now that I can just think of it as in an analytical sense, it is actually a very good fight, and very interesting to think about, and lots of X factors here, lots of questions hanging in the air for both fighters. In this case, I don't think that robs the fight of anything in the lead-up. Some of those X factors could mean that it doesn't exactly deliver as it plays out. But as a speculative future thing, still bursting with potential, all the questions I have only make the matchup more interesting to me. Before I let you talk about it, really quickly. Otherwise on this card, we've got Rafa dos Anjos is now fighting Renato Moicano. We'll talk about that for what it's worth. Edson Barboza versus Bryce Mitchell. We've got Kevin Holland versus Cowboy Oliveira. And a couple of other interesting fights on the undercard as well. Most notably for us in Heavy Hands land, the very first fight on the card, Mikhail Oleksiejczuk versus Dustin Jacoby, is maybe my second or third favorite fight on the card. So if we don't talk about that here, it'll probably make it into some kind of bonus episode over on the Heavy Hands Patreon. All right, Phil, your thoughts, preliminary thoughts on the main event.
It's one of these ones where it's a very modern welterweight fight, isn't it?
How do you mean?
Because the classic thing about modern welterweight, ever since pretty much the GSP era, in some ways even during the GSP era, although to a lesser extent, the main thing is that people just get rankings and find a way to sit on them. And, you don't get a better example of that than these two men.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who have barely any relevant welterweight wins between them at this point.
Right.
Almost no one they have beaten is actually still either in the UFC or
in the division.
Or in the divisions they're discussing. RDA has gone down. Darren Till has gone up.
Mm-hmm.
So there's barely anyone left that they've beaten, but they're still doggedly hanging on to it thanks to the incredible charisma, which I think has led to that sort of general feeling of malaise about the whole thing. It's like, come on, guys. Isn't like. On the other hand, it is actually like a very compelling fight.
Yeah.
think when we had the like the BMF belt, I think the problem with that one was that it wasn't just that it was kind of competitively irrelevant.
Yeah.
Was that was and that it was built up more than it actually was to be more than it was. The problem with that one was that if you looked at it, it became really clear that Masvidal was going to just torch Diaz.
Yes, in that case, it was a fight that if you like to think about fights and break them down, then and I'm not saying by any means that is the right or certainly not the only way to enjoy fights. But if you're like us, pretentious, insufferable, 50% English, then a matchup like that depends entirely on the pairing of personalities. Hence the sort of need to have like the BMF belt. It's that was all just about attitude. Like that was a wrestling match more than anything else, like a pro wrestling match. This one, you can ignore the personalities and you still have what looks like a very competitive and open-ended fight on your hands.
Yeah. These are two actually genuinely, they're two genuinely very good fighters who are, if not in their prime, at least plausibly close to it.
Yeah. Although I think that's a question for both of them that this fight could go some way to answering is, how close are either of them to peak form?
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the key things that the fight hinges on.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about this before with regards to Colby Covington. He's a weird example of someone who I think is overrated in the larger media sphere and probably underrated in the nerdy
by hardcore
sort of the nerdy dweebs that we hang out with.
Yeah, I agree. Put someone like people like you and I in an uncomfortable position, Phil. It means we have to occasionally defend Colby Covington to people who really have every reason to dislike him, except for the idea that, yes, we agree, basically no relevant welterweight wins, and yet I think it's very clearly it has to be one of the best welterweights in the world. He's a very good fighter. His style is super functional. It's simple and straightforward. Again, there's kind of a question about that too now, but we'll get into that. But yes, Colby Covington, the hardcores have turned on him, and I get it, but also it's like, he did get here for a reason. He was pretty cleanly ran his way to the top, and for all intents and purposes, appears to still be that fighter, or at least still have that guy in him, even if it takes Kamaru Usman murdering him 2 or 3 times to bring it back out. Again, we'll get into that.
I mean, problem is that Covington is simply a very troublesome archetype. Like he's simply a fighter that's almost always going to be very hard for anyone but the most absolutely elite defensive technicians to look good against.
Yeah.
Either you're going to just physically overpower him, or, which, even for Kamaru Usman was not particularly difficult, or you're just going to be stuck in an ugly fight. He's a straight punching, volume throwing, extremely physically tough, insanely well conditioned wrestler who will just go for a really long time.
Yeah. He has the two things which define modern MMA. Wrestling and pressure. There's no way that style is not going to yield results. And he's tough enough to make it work. He's got the conditioning to make it work. And he is, while not a standout technician, I think, in either of his 2 phases, compared to some of the best in the world, he's pretty good. He's not a joke on the feet. He's certainly not a joke in the wrestling. And the pace makes these things more effective, whether or not you can pick them apart at a technical level.
Absolutely. So, and this fight is specifically interesting because it's one of those ones where obviously these guys know each other very well, fought each other quite a bit. But I don't think there are really many good parallels in who they fought at all.
Yeah.
For the guy that they're going up against. So the sort of information discrepancy between us and them is, way higher than it normally is.
Yeah, very interesting.
So I mean, I will put my cards on the table. Actually, if they both fight this and they are both close to their prime, I would actually expect Colby Covington to win this. The same reason that I expected him to beat Robbie Lawler, and for the same reason I would honestly like. I know there was a big thing that obviously Robbie Lawler was on the downslope, but I think I said at the time I would expect Colby Covington, unfortunately, to beat Robbie Lawler at any stage in Robbie Lawler's career.
Sure.
And I think that a prime Colby Covington simply has too much pace, or Jorge Masvidal. Like, don't think he needs to be. Masvidal is a very good defensive wrestler. He's not the most punishing defensive wrestler.
No, he can be driven. He can be driven into the fence. He's lost, or at least let many fights get very close, precisely because of that.
So the fact remains that Covington could just push him in. It's not the fact that Covington would be successful on most of his shots. I think that it's just the fact that he would get many chances to do so.
Yeah.
There's lots of technical that I think in terms of the feet, obviously it would probably be a different story. But specifically, Covington really isn't a particularly great striker, and really think one of his best tools are really his kicks, and Masvidal is a tremendous kick defender. But mostly I think it's just the fact that lots of this fight is going to get eaten up in the clinch. If you remember, and Masvidal has not really thrived in fights which are at above a medium pace, I would say. Think of the Maia fight or the Ben Henderson fight. These were sort of physical grappling heavy fights where he got kind of knackered.
Yeah,
I've never seen anything like the. I've never seen that RDA fight is that Colby had with Maia. Sorry, the fight that Colby had with RDA. Never seen anything like that from Masvidal, or even close to it.
No.
Regardless of whether you thought Colby won it, sheer pace at which he was competitive with RDA over, I simply do not think Masvidal could keep up with that.
Yeah, it's not like these have been matchups that Masvidal has exclusively lost. But yeah, there are the two fights you mentioned. There's the first fight with Kamaru Usman. There was the fight with Pat Healy in 2014. I think that was Masvidal's UFC debut.
That's a good shout.
These are clinging pace fighters who will, sort of ignore the finer points of striking technique in favor of putting their shots together and using them to get inside and attack takedowns. And the interesting thing about about the question of where Colby Covington is right now is that the ones of those matchups that Masvidal has won line up with the problems Covington may be having, right? Like Pat Healy was more tentative on the feet, I think, than in his best performances, and was unable to convert a lot of his takedowns. He did not stack layered takedown threats on top of each other quite enough, although, again, this is the kind of matchup where Masvidal will back himself into the cage, will have to spend a lot of time defensively wrestling. And then there's the Damian Maia one where it's old Damian Maia. He can't really maintain that pace for long. He's got really just like one route in to make his takedowns work, and then is in some ways more vulnerable at range than any of the other pressure wrestlers Masvidal has had to fight. And then the other ones, Kamaru Usman and Ben Henderson, both reasonably close to the peaks of their powers, they beat him pretty cleanly, in my opinion. I think even that Ben Henderson fight, I think that's a Ben Henderson win, even though it was a split, and Usman undoubtedly beat him pretty soundly just by holding him against the fence. So, yeah, it's a positional weakness that Masvidal has often been made to pay for. And if Colby Covington fights like Colby Covington should, like he usually has, I agree with you. That looks like a fundamentally good matchup for Colby. Well, this is where we get into the questions, I suppose, about where Covington is right now. Because the guy who came out against Kamaru Usman in the rematch was not that guy. He was trying to do something totally different, which in many ways I think is antithetical to who he is as a fighter. Not just the growing pains you expect out of someone making a big change, but literally someone trying to do something that makes them miserable in the attempt of it, which is to move around on the outside, to use kicks in a vacuum as a range tool, which is always a strategy that, or a tactic anyway, that is asking to be punished, because kicks do not enforce range the way that like a jab and good pivoting footwork does. I guess you have your teeps, but basically no one in MMA throws those well. Colby Covington is certainly not among them. And if you're going to move around on the outside and throw range kicks, the problem is they leave you vulnerable to be countered and chased after once you throw one. They don't create a linear sort of obstacle that the opponent can't just run through. It's essentially like trying to fight from the outside with just a big right hand. Like it's not.
And they are specifically dangerous to use against Jorge Masvidal.
Absolutely,
who's one of the very best kick counterers in MMA.
Yeah, you called him before a great kick defender. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I think what you meant was he's exceptionally good at punishing kicks.
Yes,
and super dangerous if you're going to be trying to kick off the back foot. Not to mention the fact that I don't think Colby Covington likes doing it. He looked miserable having to do that against Kamaru Usman. And there may be differences, but if you let Jorge Masvidal come forward, he will be out kicking you in most matchups. He will be working his jab and driving you backwards. He will be putting combinations together. It seems like a terrible idea. So the question is, was that just a change Colby thought he had to make for Kamaru Usman before, realizing halfway through that, in fact, his classic style maybe would have worked better against this version of Usman than anything else? Or is it going to be like endemic to Colby Covington's fights now? Is he now, because I don't have the most faith in MMA Masters as a gym, I have to say. They, I sort of mockingly predicted when we talked about the Covington-Usman rematch that Colby would come in and his big adjustment would be calf kicks. But that's literally what they did. That seemed to be their idea, is let's completely rob your style of all the built-in, the pace, which is the connective tissue that makes everything you do work, that covers up all your technical flaws. Let's remove the pace and do calf kicks. Terrible strategy. I'm sorry. Awful strategy. And when it clearly didn't work in the first round, what did his corner tell him after round one? Stick to the game plan, they said. Was never going to work. Not in a million years. So is that a problem he's going to have going forward with this camp now that he's no longer at ATT? Or are they going to take a cue and go back to what Colby's actually good at?
I mean, I think it's worth considering that this might just be who he is now, because we noted that he didn't actually look particularly great in the Woodley fight either, in much the same ways.
True.
Looked tentative, and capital T technical. And so I think in some ways this reflects back to the point about the archetype that Covington is. Is, as I said, it's a recipe for good rankings and like upsets. Just a incredibly durable, high-paced, aggressive wrestler who can strike on the feet because they're durable enough to.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter that they're not great at it, because they can just walk through fire and deliver shots anyway, and eventually they'll probably get to the clinch. I mean, it's been a historically tremendously effective.
Yes, it is
MMA archetype.
It is an initiative seizing style, and there's nothing more important in MMA than initiative.
What is the major problem with this archetype in most of its forms? It doesn't last very long.
True.
Problem is that it requires, the cardio requires that you work very hard. The wrestling puts tremendous pressure on your joints, and they're probably going to take tons of shots because they're going to be constantly walking forward into them. So you have many fighters who have fitted this general archetype who have had brief, scintillating primes and then hideously collapsed.
Yes.
I think Covington is, to some extent, trying to ward this off. Question is he doing that because he's trying to figure out, because he thinks that's a good long-term plan, or is he doing that because, physical degradation is already setting in?
Yeah.
My general take is that probably... My general take is that probably he'll have something like the Usman fight where he'll get into a bit of trouble and then he'll go back to form. I do think he will do it faster against Masvidal. I think partially just due to the sheer familiarity of being able to get back in there with someone that he knows very well, and that he knows probably very well what works against him. I remember back when they were still friends, I remembered seeing one of these things where it was showing it had training together, and they just finished a round of heavy wrestling sparring, and Masvidal was just absolutely miserable. Covington was obviously cocky and full of and completely unfazed and untired.
Right.
Masvidal was just having a hell of a time, and I just think that that is in some ways why Covington got so angry when Masvidal popped into the spotlight. That he I honestly think he probably just sort of had his number when they sparred together. I think he felt like he was the best in the gym or whatever it was. And that Masvidal was overtaking him in that way. I feel like he probably genuinely overtook Masvidal at some point. Obviously, and I don't know how much I'm reading into things, but I kind of feel like Masvidal has said certain things, I think, in the build-up that probably reflect that for me. Is that he said, I'm going to show how limited Colby Covington is. And take that in one of two ways. Because you can take it as to show how limited he is, i.e. I'm going to destroy him with a complete MMA game. Or it could be just if he pushes me into the clinch and just forces an endless wrestling game on me, that's all we're going to end up having.
Sure.
Could end up looking Covington is simply just the same wrestling edge for 5 rounds.
What was Masvidal's response to Kamaru Usman doing that? It was just to call him a bitch for taking the easiest path to cleanly beating him. That is a way he definitely felt in that matchup that Usman was limited. The unfortunate thing is that it was a limited way to win. Yeah. I mean, I do agree with you on the point that whether or not he's made a change, old Covington will come out. I think we saw that in the Usman fight. This is why styles work the way they do. They are a natural outgrowth of personality and each person's like unique comfort zones in a fight. I don't think anyone told Colby Covington necessarily to fight the way he was fighting before. I think this is a way that worked for him, and it was a natural product of his wrestling background. Pace and stick-to-itiveness is very important in wrestling. And he's like an insecure guy too. So like insecure, impatient, like the desire to just bring the fight to the opponent and make it so they have to respond to what you're doing the entire time. That seems like a very natural fit for Colby Covington's personality. He's not the kind of guy in Trash Talk, for example, where he does particularly well when put on the back foot, right? Just as a personality. He's not going to come back with a great quip. If he has time to think up a burn in advance, he can deliver a good one. He occasionally has good tweets. He had that really good one about John Jones. Where he was like, yeah, the waiter at Applebee's is going to spike your drink with cocaine, you fucking idiot. Like, this is Colby Covington at his best is taking the lead and making the opponent respond. And because of that, because it is natural to him, even if he has to end up in trouble first, it's going to happen. Colby Covington, under duress, is going to do what Colby Covington is meant to do. I still have some questions about that. Does he still have the ability to do that at pace for at least 3 rounds in the back half of the fight, as would be necessary to win? He seemed to be able to turn it up really well against Kamaru Usman. But it wasn't just like a constant growth of pace and pressure. He still ran into issues. I don't recall him looking tired late in the fight necessarily. It was more that Usman, got on his defensive jab and his counters and started punishing Colby's technical flaws, making him run into things. But I do wonder if, having made what appears to be a concerted effort to change his style, if he's just getting less rounds in of the kind of thoughtless conditioning that he probably had before, where I imagine a lot of his conditioning just came from doing lots of wrestling and lots of sparring.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, is that obviously, there's his pace that he wants to hit. There's also the phase that he wants to fight in. And as we've seen with John Jones, you abandon a particular phase for long enough, you can get worse at it.
Yeah.
You can't just be like, you can't just be like, oh, I'm always going to have the wrestling in my back pocket. If he stops doing it for long enough,
yeah,
eventually it can deteriorate.
And you could definitely argue he's been ignoring it more and more for a while now.
Yeah. I mean, when was his last wrestling heavy performance?
Was it Robbie Lawler, or was it before that, or after that?
Yeah, I guess it was Lawler and Dos Anjos, and even then he spent a lot of time on the feet in both fights. But
Lawler, lots of takedowns in both those. Those were both pretty classic Covington performances.
Yeah.
You had certain ones before then where he showed a proclivity to avoid that. The Maya fight in particular, just a hideous slugfest on the feet. But his last 3 fights now, they've not been particularly wrestling heavy, and he tried to bring it back a bit against Usman in the rematch, but I don't know, it's hard to gauge, because, Usman is a tremendously good wrestler in his own right. We didn't get to see Colby Covington posing anything like a layered wrestling threat. He would get in on a shot and it would just get killed.
I mean, they both kind of did that a little bit, where they were just like,
right, yeah.
They sort of gestured towards wrestling, and they're just like, nah.
Yeah, it was just an idea. Here,
almost like either one of them was too worried about looking stupid if they failed.
That's kind of the feeling. So here, though, at his best, Colby Covington, I think I've even undersold Covington as a chain wrestler in the past. But there are a lot of positions, actually in particular, one that stood out to me watching footage, Colby Covington getting to the back, rear waist cinch Colby Covington, he has a lot of attacks from that position It's a position he used to wind up in frequently off of the double leg shot, or after taking someone down and they quickly stand back up, he'd slide around to the back. He's got foot sweeps. He's got trips, and I don't know if wrestlers distinguish between blocks and sweeps, but sort of knee block and foot block takedowns like you see in Muay Thai.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an area where Jorge Masvidal is particularly weak. He's
interesting.
He's not really that good at fighting. He's not bad in the clinch. In a face-to-face clinch, he will spend a lot of time being controlled, but he also has clever ways to create space, and he can deliver some damaging strikes. He's got particularly good elbows and good knees. He's got a good sort of tie clinch. You get around to his back, it becomes a position where you have to fight hands. You have to fight hands and think more about your weight distribution and attacking grips. And I've never seen him do a particularly good job at doing that. All these guys who beat him in the clinch, when they get to his back, he becomes particularly passive. He doesn't threaten Kimuras, which Robbie Lawler did with some success when Covington got to those positions. He will often just kind of drape himself over the grip. And that's where his focus becomes entirely on, all right, I'm going to stay on my feet. But in the meantime, the opponent gets a pretty secure position from which they can continue to threaten his balance. They can work him over with knees to the legs. They can burn time controlling him in a tie-up. So yeah, there are a lot of positions Covington can get to if he just brings his pace to the fight. I'm still going to pick Colby here because as much as I may have sort of open-ended questions about how good his conditioning may still be in that kind of fight, I think I've seen enough evidence recently to suggest that Masvidal's conditioning in a 5-round fight is not great. That even if he has success early, I expect that to bring out a better version of Colby Covington, however the fight begins, and that once it gets into a sustained grind, Masvidal, I don't think, is going to continue to find as many big moments. I think there's more of a cushion in this matchup than in something like Usman 2 for Covington to flag and still have the initiative and still get to fight his fight. So I am going to pick him.
Yeah, likewise, I think. I think Masvidal did well. I think he did surprisingly well from a cardio perspective in the first Usman fight, which was short notice, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah, I think it was.
Famously, he had to jump in.
Right. It was like 8 days
on short notice. He was like, "Look at how well I did on short notice. Think of how well I do next time. I deserve a title shot," and then he got obliterated.
He was okay. I mean, the problem is it's tough to evaluate because he spent a lot of time passive, and then
that's the thing, is that it was looking okay at the cost of clearly losing every single round.
So I don't know how well I can evaluate his stamina there when it's like, oh, he still has energy for 2 explosions around. Like, even if you're gassed, you should be able to manage that.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of reason if you are a Covington fan for whatever reason to be concerned that he's losing his ability to implement his game plan from the beginning, both from a phase angle and from just a pace angle. But I think once he does, I just don't think it's a great matchup for Masvidal.
Yeah.
I think it might be, again, unless Covington has really bought into the idea of himself as like a cool action fighter who strikes with people and knocks them out.
Yeah.
Which I would love and would be extremely funny.
Sure.
Just think that we're going to get a redo of Usman 1.
Yeah, Masvidal just doesn't have the defensive weapons off his back foot. He doesn't. He backs up in a straight line too easily. He can be put against the fence. He's got this could happen. If you're gonna get knocked out going for a level change, the flying knee worked going forward. So it wouldn't be a massive shock if this fight starts with Masvidal getting to grab the initiative, And when he, forces Covington back into a wrestling heavy approach, he gets a reactive shot out of him that he can punish. But going backwards, Masvidal doesn't really have uppercuts. He's not a prodigious body puncher. He doesn't have a lot of...
Basically, are you going to shoot into a body kick a la...
Yeah.
Aljamain against Marais.
And those are, the kicks are inherently risky to throw off the back foot for a variety of reasons. So, yeah, if it turns, whether it begins that way, which it should if you're Colby Covington, or it turns into it, a pressure wrestling game plan from someone who can, I assume, still do it for a better part of 5 rounds is never a comfortable matchup for Masvidal. All right. Well, there's your main event, folks. Like I said, I don't know if just having these two incredibly obnoxious personalities is enough to warrant this main event slot. Although clearly from a selling point perspective, it's more than justified. I think people do care about these guys for those reasons. It is a good matchup and a compelling one, and I'm certainly happy to see it with 5 rounds. So I'm not entirely butthurt about this being a 5-rounder main event. I'm happy to see that. And I look.
So as long as it doesn't translate into a title shot for either one of them.
Oh my God! Please, fresh blood, please. But yeah,
I would honestly rather they would just okay, Chimaev gets next.
Yeah, just do it.
I would literally rather they just put Chimaev in right away.
I 100% agree, actually. And if not that, then throw. You got other guys here. You got Luque. I know he's got a fight booked, but there's other guys who have yet to fight for the title who are very viable top welterweights. So yeah, it is what it is. Let's take a break. When we come back, we have the somewhat perplexing new main event of Rafael dos Anjos versus Renato Moicano, Edson Barboza versus Bryce Mitchell, and Kevin Holland versus Cowboy Oliveira. All of that, I think, after this. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. As promised, the co-main event of UFC 272, and a weird co-main event it is. Rafael dos Anjos was supposed to fight Rafael Fiziev once before, for some fight night card. I can't remember. It was only a few weeks ago. And then that was rescheduled for this card. And then, I guess just like a couple days ago, Fiziev got diagnosed with COVID. And so that fight had to be postponed. And now we've got Renato Moicano stepping in on short notice, which I do not think is in itself a bad fight or uninteresting. I think if they had just randomly made RDA Moicano from the outset, I wouldn't have complained or really thought twice. I would have thought maybe RDA deserves a bigger fight than that, but yeah, whatever. This is fine, interesting. I'm interested in both those guys. Neither seems to have a clear path to the top right now. Why not? The only problem is that RDA Fiziev seemed like a really meaningful, important fight. And unfortunately, this, Phil, has resulted in lots of fans, I guess, being mad at RDA for accepting a replacement. I saw quite a few responses.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're mad at him because Makhachev offered to step in, and RDA offered for the fight to be 165 or 170 pounds.
Which is strange. Because presumably that should be Makhachev offering that, because he just fought and then probably pigged out. You were in the process of preparing to fight at 155. So curious why you would suggest that as RDA.
mean, you can understand it from a purely stylistic perspective. He was going to be fighting a smaller striker, and now is fighting a large wrestler, and he just wanted to be as big as possible. And
Sure.
Poirier has had his fair share of short notice fights, and also has just been that guy who will fight anyone. So, at least from my perspective, Poirier has frankly built up enough badass credit in the bank. He can do whatever the fuck he likes at this point.
I agree.
He's for everyone. If he's like, I want to fight this wrestler on short notice, without, being able to get as big as I can, fine, fuck it.
Yeah.
And, obviously Makhachev RDA would have been a very compelling matchup.
Mm-hmm.
But also it would be yet another one where you would have found yourself wishing that it had been on a full camp.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, at least this one, the lack of meaning in some ways does not, it is not a detriment to the fight itself.
Yeah.
It's not one where you're like, someone's journey towards the title could be changed because of this.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, I mean, assuming Makhachev was serious, and assuming that the UFC actually would have let him do it,
mm-hmm.
There would be a chance that he would actually just, get derailed with a loss.
And
there's nothing like that here. It's just a good fight between good fighters.
We have no idea what happened behind closed doors with the negotiations on that one. It could have just been an empty offer from Makhachev for all we know.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? So yeah, I kind of agree. Like, I don't hate this as a matchup. And as far as short notice replacements go, one where it doesn't add to an already long list of of footnotes on a title contender's run to the belt. It kind of improves it in a weird way over something like Makhachev RDA, even though, yes, I would have very happily taken that fight. What do you make of it? RDA, Moicano. Moicano had his best win in ages. Both, I think, most meaningful from one perspective, but also just, I think, his most confident sort of self-possessed victory, where he really just looked like a veteran fighter who was in there knowing that he could solve whatever problems came at him. How do you view the style matchup here?
Fun for Moicano, I got to be honest.
A rough one for Moicano?
I think he is a good fighter. I don't think he's one who is primed to do particularly well against RDA.
Yeah, I think I agree. Why don't you elaborate?
So, I mean, I think basically Moicano is weirdly... I know Sir I'd agree with this take. Moicano is weirdly similar to Donald Cerrone.
He beat Hernandez in almost the exact same way Cerrone did. Just for a bit of helpful MMA math.
I didn't even consider them being similar before that fight, but I think that there are some similarities between him and especially like a late career Donald Cerrone.
Yeah.
Or like maybe not like the last stages of welterweight Cerrone or the most recent one that we've seen, but essentially what we have is someone who's not particularly quick on their feet, but is long and rangy, throws straight punches and kicks, and can hit very nice reactive takedowns and is a huge threat on the ground. Mm-hmm. Is defensively little plodding, and is in bad trouble once he's backed up.
Yeah.
And RDA kind of crushes that archetype.
Yeah, that is
kind of what he does.
That is a very
like
good point.
Not just Donald Cerrone, but like Anthony Pettis. In some ways, Paul Felder, just like a big, slow, tall, rangy guy.
Yeah.
These are the fights where RDA where RDA is going to be at his pressuring best, where he can force people back and level change and counter and wrestle. And I don't think that Moicano has the outlets. I don't think he really has Low kicks become very dangerous because of RDA's ability to counter in combination. And I don't think he's going to be able to wrestle him, although it would be a bit of an indictment on RDA if he could.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's just naturally a tough start matchup for him.
Yeah, I think I now see completely what you mean, and especially because that RDA's last fight, the most encouraging thing about it is that it was a return to his classic fighting style. When I had kind of thought that was a thing of the past, that he had, spent all this time developing his boxing and had, in some ways trying to compensate for the weaknesses of his pressuring style, had developed a sort of unhappy medium where, yes, he definitely got better at the things he was bad at before, but I was thinking, okay, he's also kind of forgotten how to do what he does well. He pressured the shit out of Paul Felder. It kind of was the perfect marriage of all the guy he was before and the new skills he developed, because a lot of his pressure was with that southpaw jab. And he brought his offensive wrestling back. Somewhat limited success, but as we discussed with Colby Covington, it doesn't entirely matter. If you are constantly holding the initiative and backing your opponent up, you can just afford to try things and not have everything work in a vacuum. It all works together. And I think you're right. That Cerrone comparison is actually quite troubling for Moicano, and I think it is very on the nose. Or very accurate, I should say. I have an idea in my head of Moicano.
Yeah, so I don't feel like you wouldn't be making any comments about Moicano's particularly Gallic appearance. He is a man with quite an impressive conch.
Yeah, he's sort of the Michael Imperioli of UFC lightweights. Sorry, I've been rewatching The Sopranos. I think that's an apt comparison. That I have this idea in my head of Moicano not being terrible off the back foot, but in the same way as Cerrone, it really is contextual. Like there are matchups.
It's like he's a very dangerous person to stop against. And he's a dangerous person to blitz against, but if you just steadily push him backwards...
Yes.
And in fact, I mean, he's less dangerous to blitz against than Cerrone is. He doesn't have the step knee counter and all that other kind of stuff.
Sure. Although he's got uppercuts. He's got better uppercuts than Cerrone to make up for that.
That's fair enough. Good point.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. And maybe not as dangerous with the knees and the kicks off the back foot. Cerrone was always a devastatingly powerful kicker. I don't think Moicano was quite that deadly with the kicks, though he does have great kicks. But I think you're right. If you can just maintain pressure on Moicano, then his upright stance and lacking defense becomes a problem. If you don't respond to all of his counters by just backing up, then he has a much harder time putting his strikes together, like Cerrone. If he can't sort of run along the tracks and pursue you, then he can be reduced to much more of a one-and-done kind of fighter. And, he's just too defensively open.
It's also just the fact that, like, this is a lightweight, welterweight tweener against a featherweight, lightweight tweener.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm expecting a physical, aggressive fight from RDA, this is going to be one of those few fights where he actually might have... He's obviously going to be, like, visibly shorter than Moicano, but he's going to be bigger than him.
Yeah. Now, there is the possibility for Moicano to make something happen on the counter. He's a pretty solid, accurate counter puncher, even if it often does mean, like at least a 40% chance of eating a shot clean before he can get those counters off. Eddie Alvarez knocked RDA out on the counter, or at least began the knockout sequence on the counter. But Eddie Alvarez is also quite good at moving around and changing angles and is, I think, more singularly powerful than Moicano and tougher. And yeah, it seems like an outside shot. Just relying on countering against RDA, i.e. conceding the pressure to him, has never been a very good idea. Paul Felder had some success on the counter too. It did not result.
And RDA has lost. Yes, and RDA has lost clearly some physical ability. Although, to be honest, in the Felder fight, I think specifically, I was like, I think he has lost less pure physical ability than I actually thought he had.
Yeah, that really was a fight that recontextualizes his whole welterweight run. You're like, maybe he just needs to be bigger than people to look like classic RDA.
And he's not bigger than Felder, but maybe he just needs a certain level, I think, of
more size parity.
Of physical parity. But yeah, I mean, he might have lost some things, but I don't think we certainly haven't seen him lose either his durability or his cardio.
Yep. You're absolutely right.
If he suddenly gets knocked out, his chin suddenly goes, there won't have been any forewarning.
Yeah, I hope it's more like RDA Cerrone 1. Because that was a fight that was, while still definitely an RDA win, it had some interesting moments. What I'm really saying is I want to see RDA tangle with Moicano on the ground. I think it's perfectly possible he could do what he did to Cerrone in their rematch, running with the comparison and just flatten him. That has happened to Moicano enough times to expect something like that. But I would love to see Moicano survive the early going, and even if he's getting taken down, I really enjoy watching RDA have to contend with a dangerous submission grappling game. I want to see him cutting through a genuinely very good guard like he had to against Cerrone. So, it's still an interesting matchup to me, but I think you really hit the nail on the head. It is a... oh, wait, hold on. I refreshed the page. Okay, no, it's still there.
What?
It somehow moved down. God. It somehow moved down to the announced bout section.
Oh my god.
Who knows? Who knows? If this fight doesn't end up happening, don't fucking blame us, okay? It's out of our hands. All right, let's not waste any more time on it then, just in case it does suddenly go off the card again. Let's talk about...
I like the note of panic in your voice there, as you realize.
Wait a minute, it's gone. It's gone. Let's talk about...
more than note of panic, like as you were like, oh, all of this might be for nothing. Quickly, let's move on to Bryce Mitchell, Edson Barboza.
But let's do that. Edson Barboza, Bryce Mitchell. Fortunately, not a political debate.
Praise the Lord. This card really is, you sort of alluded to it, really is kind of packed with obnoxious weirdos.
Yeah, for better and for worse. Kevin Holland's an obnoxious weirdo, but a lovable one.
Mm-hmm.
Who else is there?
I mean, Greg Hardy, obviously.
Oh, God. Obnoxious and weirdo both seem like
too... Yeah, they're underselling it, but
too complimentary.
Also not wrong.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, speaking of this particular obnoxious weirdo, Bryce Mitchell is very good. I may as well just repeat the tweet that I had about him last week. Bryce Mitchell is one of the most promising young fighters in the UFC today. The reason for that, Phil? Can you guess?
Don't need to guess, Connor.
Constant drilling of technique. Google Bryce Mitchell drill to learn more. But Bryce Mitchell is legitimately really, really good. And this seems in many ways like a matchup just tailor-made to vault him into serious contention. I've been super impressed by Bryce Mitchell for his entire UFC run, honestly. I know he's super annoying, whatever. But as I've said many times, the problem with guys like Greg Hardy, the less obvious problems.
Yes, quickly, Connor, recontextualize that statement.
The problem
with someone like Greg Hardy is that he isn't actually very good at MMA. This is greatest sin.
This is like a Norm Macdonald joke. You know the real problem with Bill Cosby is the hypocrisy. Really, I thought it was the rape. As Norm Macdonald would say. But yeah, one of the problems with having to discuss Greg Hardy is like I'm used to heinous monsters, and I'm not saying Bryce Mitchell's as bad as Greg Hardy. Having bad political opinions is not the same as being a monster. But the problem was that he just wasn't good. So, why should I talk about this? Bryce Mitchell, set the political opinions aside, even more so than Colby Covington, he appears to be very good at MMA and has a really modern, aggressive, multifaceted approach to the sport that I frankly find very entertaining to watch. I'm always going to tune in to watch Bryce Mitchell fights, and it has nothing to do with how he may feel about vaccines or whatever. So, but this seems, on that note, like a pretty good matchup for Bryce.
Yeah, it is one where I think Barboza has to show something better or something different than what he's shown throughout his MMA career, basically.
Yes.
Or Mitchell has to show a level of resolve, which I think we've already seen that he can have.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
He's a very tough, determined fighter from what we've seen so far. His fights have not been altogether easy so far. He's had, in that way, I think, a much more sort of satisfying run to this position than somebody like Islam Makhachev. For me personally, just because he's had plenty of fights where it has not been one-way traffic. And so I've had many opportunities to see how he deals with a fight where he starts to gas at some point, or the opponent hits him clean and has a couple minutes of momentum, and he's always managed to turn that around and end the fight strong.
Yep. And I think the most, in a sort of different way to Covington Masvidal, the most telling fight for him is in fact his last one.
Yeah.
Which is always great, because you don't need to go back very far.
Mm-hmm.
The Feely fight was, as we called it on the show, a genuinely troubling stylistic matchup for someone who had so far been, a very good grappler, mm-hmm. a decent wrestler, and a developing striker with the right ideas.
Mm-hmm.
That was very much a fight where it could have all gone horribly wrong for Bryce Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't.
No.
It was a very controlled performance.
Aced it.
He pressured a very mobile opponent who is, frankly, in many ways, better off the back foot than Edson Barboza is.
Yeah.
Who is a more comfortable grappler than Edson Barboza is. The only real downside being that he's obviously also just far less dynamic than Edson Barboza. But, showed that kind of consistency, and as you mentioned, over 3 rounds in a reasonably tough fight.
Mm-hmm.
He showed that he could not only do it but keep doing it. And again, what we've said about Edson many times is that if you have coherent pressure, if you can mix a takedown game in with that, you basically just need to get Edson moving.
Yeah.
Like the bus in Speed, once he starts moving backwards beyond a certain pace, he just explodes.
Yes. Yeah, I think now I this probably shouldn't be a problem. Edson Barboza is the ultimate IQ test kind of opponent. Because all you have to do is copy the homework off the kid at the next desk, right? You've seen it done so many times before at this point. It shouldn't take that much thought to know. The key to doing all the things I want to do is to keep him running backwards, as you said. But Bryce Mitchell didn't pressure Andre Feely the whole time that they fought. And given that Barboza is a more dynamic, more dangerous striker, I do think there's potential here for things to go south early for Bryce Mitchell. If he thinks he's going to be hitting reactive shots and moving around, he doesn't mind fighting off the back foot. He likes to counter. He likes to do that thing where, the one trick that Nasrat Haqparast has, where you just sort of slowly circle left, and when the opponent tries to cut you off, you cut back across the other direction and run them into the left hand. Classic southpaw trick. He loves to do that. He likes to hit reactive shots. that could be a problem. But he can pressure. If he's smart, he'll spend the entire fight doing it. And even if he doesn't, there are many, many ways for him to turn one counter into a burst of pressure that could still result in a huge momentum swing. Because the problem here for Barboza is he's not the scrambler, he's not the wrestler that Andre Fili is. Fili made Mitchell work super hard once the wrestling was actually engaged. Once it became a wrestling match, Mitchell is probably going to have much more sustained success once he gets Barboza down. He's got like I said, a very modern approach to MMA grappling, like real cutting edge shit. He's got a lot of those, a lot of the good sort of in between positions that work especially well for MMA grappling, where he will go like 3/4 mount. Daniel Cormier talked about this the last time he fought, that he will spend a lot of time. He'll spend a lot of time not fully passing out of either half guard or into mount, keeping his options open, and more importantly, keeping the opponent's options open and having a dangerous submission threat whichever way they go. And so it's sort of like it is like a pressuring approach on the ground. You're keeping a threat in the opponent's face, giving them options, but none of them good. And in the meantime, you're still essentially enjoying the benefits of both mount and half guard, which are both very good positions for the top grappler to be in. He's also got the sort of leg riding cross wrist control, the half back mount ride kind of thing that Khabib had such great success with. These sort of in between positions where you are anticipating that the opponent is going to scramble and giving them the option to do it, only that it'll destroy them if they try to commit and finish follow that scramble to its logical conclusion. And in the meantime, you get to ride that position and punish them. This is a kind of game that Bryce Mitchell does exceptionally well, and it's one we've seen work numerous times on the ground against Edson Barboza, whether or not he's having to deal with insurmountable pressure on the feet. So it could get interesting is all I'm saying if he doesn't pressure the whole time. But having that out, he's really at the top echelon of grapplers that have already beaten Barboza in the past.
I think the only caveats are obviously Barboza is proportionally much bigger than any of the grapplers he fought, than Mitchell compared to any of the grapplers he fought in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Lee and Khabib and such like are very big lightweights, and now Barboza is a very big featherweight.
Mm-hmm.
I will say I also don't think that's going to matter that much. I think it will matter a bit. I think what we can see is that Barboza still has a good sprawl and he still reacts well. But he's still just not great at wrestling off the fence or really doing anything off the fence. Like Ige still took him down just like everyone used to.
Yep.
I just ran him into the cage and body locked him and then just got behind him and picked him up.
Yep.
So I think if Mitchell can stick to consistent pressure, I don't see a reason why he can't also do that kind of thing. He is more of I think he's a shot. He has a very good shot. We've actually seen that now. He's one of those guys where we're like, he's mostly a clinch wrestler, but then he showed a really good reactive shot against Fili.
Mm-hmm.
But if he can, his shot is not necessarily, I think, point this time round. I think the point of the shot should be to drive Barboza into the fence. The other caveat is obviously that you can execute the game plan correctly against Barboza, and then just a single weird thing happens and you die.
Yeah. Happened to Dariush.
Yeah, and almost happened to Kevin Lee.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, those are the real caveats. But yeah, I think it's a matchup where, I mean, Mitchell, he just looks like a really quality fighter.
Yeah.
And, he looks like, I mean, and, regardless of what he says in his everyday life, he looks like a smart fighter.
Yeah, no, his game is just...
Covington sort of fights the way his personality and his fighting style are sort of intrinsically linked. He doesn't fight like a clever person. He fights like his name is Chaos.
Yes, and when he tries to fight clever, it falls apart.
It looks incredibly awkward.
Yes,
like a monkey in a tux. But Mitchell looks like a smart, thoughtful fighter in the cage, whatever he's like outside it.
I even think that's reflected in his personality. He's more like a bizarro GSP. Smart fighters often tend to be conspiratorial, shall we say?
Yeah, because he's thinking about things.
He's thinking about things. He's just following insane paths of logic, but there is a logical process there that leads him to that point. I think he is a thoughtful person. His thoughts are just insane. But
good take.
No, thank you. So yeah, I agree. He's a smart fighter, very flexible style. He seems durable enough to survive any of those scary moments that might come his way, and otherwise is not also altogether easy to hit. I think the most impressive thing about Bryce Mitchell is that, yes, he's a sensational wrestler and grappler, but he's not a bad striker. He has had a lot of really great moments. He can counter. He can put combinations together. He can throw good straight punches without overextending himself. He has a lot of room to grow as a striker, and already a pretty good bedrock of technique there. So, he might be a nut job, but I really look forward to seeing more out of Bryce Mitchell. He's a really good fighter, and I think this is a pretty good matchup for him. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, one more fight from this card, Kevin Holland versus Cowboy Oliveira, and then everything else, in addition to any discussion we may have about Makhachev versus Green from last week and its undercard will be showing up on the Heavy Hands Patreon. Hopefully by the time you're listening to this, it's already there. So we'll be back for Holland Cowboy after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're going to take a relatively quick look here at our last fight of this week's main episode. Kevin Holland versus Alex Cowboy Oliveira. Weird fight in the way that both of these guys' fights tend to be. Kevin Holland, I would have loved to see more. I really liked the Dalkhouse matchup for him, actually. I thought that was a really interesting matchup. Lots and lots of potential to test Kevin Holland's progression or lack thereof. But this one is, I think, similar. As far as, that fight having a strange ending with just like a flash KO from a clash of heads. This is a similarly interesting fight. Not an easy one for Kevin Holland, not an opponent he can just expect to walk through. One who could trouble him in some very specific problem areas, but also someone who is himself, for very different reasons from Kyle Dalkhouse. In fact, you could argue opposite reasons from Kyle Dalkhouse. Inconsistent and vulnerable in his own right. The big difference is that Kyle Dalkhouse is a not physically overwhelming fighter who is really quite technical everywhere and has really struggled so far. You could argue just that his style would function so much better as it is, zero changes, if he was just a freak athlete. Because he could easily get away with what seems to be a completely unconscious compulsion to do everything, given the opportunity. Do everything all the time. Alex Oliveira is a guy who can kind of do everything when he chooses, precisely because he is a freak athlete. and therefore, unlike Cal Daukaus, has very little depth in any particular phase. But for that reason, it's kind of a similarly compelling matchup for Kevin Holland. Here's someone who will, it sort of equals out basically to be a very similar kind of fight for him.
It's sliders up in one area, down in the other.
Exactly.
Balancing factor, obviously, that this be is Kevin Holland's first UFC fight at welterweight.
Mm-hmm.
He's basically going, and again, this is a sliders question. He's going down to a division where he's going to be bigger and hence more able to wrestle people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also just got lots more wrestlers in, and it's just a better division.
Mm-hmm.
Oliveira is in a strange position because I don't think he's really improved at all over his time in the UFC.
No.
And I think what we're just seeing now is that his immense physical gifts are just slightly deserting him, whilst everyone is starting to figure him out a bit at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And that in turn is contributing to make him very slightly more tentative. He's no longer quite the wild man that he was when he first turned up. Yeah, as you mentioned, he will do everything, and I think that's the real concern here.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think in a striking matchup, if Oliveira's doing his big, long, like karate stance, body kicks and loopy punches thing, I would expect Holland to be a bit rattled, but then pick him off.
Yes.
If we get the Oliveira who fought, for example, and admittedly, this is going back quite some way to find a version of him that was this aggressively focusing on the takedowns. If you went back to the Oliveira who fought like Will Brooks or Tim Means the second time,
yeah,
that is a troubling matchup for Kevin Holland, because Oliveira, as you mentioned, he's not a technical wrestler, but he's a willing and powerful one who basically just shoots in on people and then tries to haul them off their feet like a sack of potatoes.
Yeah, or just crashes into them and gets like a body lock clinch and muscles them around.
Mm.
Yeah. And the question there becomes, has Kevin Holland gotten better at wrestling? He had a moment in the fight with Kyle Daukaus before the unfortunate and confusing ending, where Daukaus, it was a good look, and I'm not entirely sure how much technical progression is responsible for it, but Daukaus shot in on a double leg. Kevin was against the fence. He defended with a split stance, grabbed a whizzer. Daukaus tried to lift and dump him, and it was a near call, but Holland managed to haul him up. His hand slid over the butt, and he defended that takedown. Daukaus ran around to the back, rear waist cinch, sort of dragged Kevin around, but in the way that like lanky guys do. Kevin Holland just didn't go down. He had long limbs. He like posted on the fence and sort of fell into it, but his limbs were just too long for him to be easily taken down in a position with like sheer force, which is what Daukaus was mostly trying to use. And then he looked at Daniel Cormier in the commentary booth and said, little bit. Got a little bit better. Which I always enjoy. I hope that DC is on this card just so I can have interactions between Kevin Holland and DC. The running wrestling commentary for these fights is always fun. I'm not sure how much better he got technically, although, there were good technical, there was at least one good sort of technical response to a takedown threat in there. But it does demonstrate to me that Kevin Holland seems to be focused on not getting taken down in a way that he was not in the past. He did not concede the takedown in either of two attempts that were chained together relatively smoothly. And that awareness alone could make a big difference, coupled with the fact that he is now going to be fighting at something much closer to physical parity with his opponents. Although, granted, as you said, he has traded that benefit for moving into a division where being a weird innovator who's kind of only really good at one specific area of fighting is much harder to pull off. And everyone's going to want to wrestle him. Likely even Cowboy Oliveira. I would assume Cowboy Oliveira is going to try to wrestle him, whether he plans for it or feels it in the moment. It's Kevin Holland. You look at him and you're like, I can throw this little guy around. I can fling him on the floor. It's probably going to be something he has to deal with.
Yeah, the one thing I will say is that Oliveira really is... He can shoot, but it's not really his thing. He is a clinch wrestler. I'll say if Holland isn't good as a wrestler, he is pretty good in the clinch.
He is.
He's pretty violent there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, basically my pick is I just don't really trust Oliveira at this point.
Yeah.
I think there are just too many things that can go wrong for him now. Can get outpaced. He can get out wrestled. He can get knocked out. There are too many, everyone now knows they can guarantee that there's a part where he's going to get just too wild for his own good.
Yes.
I think, Kevin Holland, for all his potential flaws, and for all the fact that, I think this is actually a genuinely competitive and close fight.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't get scared.
No.
He will be able to pick off Oliveira should he do something mad. He's not going to be cowed, I think, is the main thing.
Especially not if it is the somewhat more passive, more cautious Oliveira we've seen at distance recently. There's a lot of room in a matchup like that for Holland to get his jab working. It's probably the kind of fight in which he is most comfortable. If Oliveira pressures and isn't just crashing into the clinch the whole time, Kevin Holland, pretty good defense, good counters. If Oliveira tries to run him around, Holland is weirdly effective just running forward, throwing hideous punches. It's been a thing that has worked for him well against many good opponents in the past. He can surprise people with these strange offbeat, sort of like the kind of things Oliveira used to surprise people with. Weird offbeat looping shots as he sort of leaps forward. As you said, some answers in the... Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, a lot of Oliveira's style on the feet is meant to maximize the distance that he's fighting at. No, he's as I said, he's got that kind of karate stance, the big long bladed stance where he can leap in with the body kick or the sort of looping 1-2.
Mm-hmm.
I think Oliveira may be shocked at how rangy Kevin Holland actually is.
Yes.
Does Kevin Holland now have the longest reach of a welterweight?
That's a good question. I don't have a...
I believe he has an 81-inch reach.
That is what Wikipedia says.
That is gigantic.
Oliveira is at 76. It's a massive.
That's a lot. I mean,
advantage.
76 is quite a lot for a welterweight.
Yeah, I want to check.
81 inches is 3 inches shorter than John Jones.
Yeah. Randy Brown, who outranged and beat Oliveira, firstly at range before beating him up on the ground, 78-inch reach, and he's a big welterweight. Interesting question. Shavkat Rakhmonov, 77. He very well may have the longest reach of any active welterweight now.
If there's an active welterweight who has a reach above that, I would be blown away.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine there's more than 2 or 3 middleweights that have longer reach than that.
I think you're right.
If that.
And
light heavyweights, for that matter.
Right, and he's effective with
really
that
long reach.
He's effective with that reach in a variety of ways. It is almost certainly why he so frequently manages to shock people with really ugly, leaping, shifting punches, because it's sort of like a thing I said about Matt Brown once. A fight like Matt Brown, Mike Swick, where he just gets someone circling and then just sort of lunges in and runs them into a hook that they just don't think they're in range for. That works for Kevin Holland a lot. He catches a lot of people by surprise when they think they're circling safely out of range. So yeah, I will take Kevin as well. It feels very weird to say, but I have a little more faith in Kevin Holland at the moment, even though my fandom of him is not based on that at all. I do think he's making a concerted effort to take this more seriously. And I would even like to imagine, I hope this is the case, that a Kevin Holland who now has to think about weight cutting, much as I hate it, I don't think it's going to be a torturous weight cut for him. He's a guy who more than once came in under 185. I think he came in at like 183 or 184 more than once. But that also, hopefully, having to focus on that will mean that he puts more effort into his conditioning, because that is a more major concern, is that the potential that Oliveira could have a really ugly, arguably unsuccessful first half of the fight, just clinching with Kevin Holland, but convert that into a win by gassing Kevin out, which has happened more than once. So I'd love to see better stamina, but, there's enough chance of that with the other factors for me to pick Kevin here.
Yeah. I think it's still quite up in the air. I think in some ways I might just be picking Kevin Holland because I like him more.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's also just some kind of trajectory going on there. Holland has lost a bunch of fights recently, but they've been to like title contenders.
Mm-hmm.
And Oliveira just, honestly, it's just bias. I think in some ways they're both just very inconsistent in their own special ways. It just remains to be seen as to whether Oliveira can find the way that he wins this fight, which I think is, he has to basically do the Tim Means fight where he just gets into the clinch and goes for double underhooks and tries to take him down a bunch.
Mm-hmm.
He has to do that, and he hasn't done it for long enough for me to trust him.
Yeah,
and I like Kevin Holland more, so I will pick Kevin Holland.
Yeah, and even that is not necessarily the exact wrestling approach I would pick to have the greatest chance of success against Kevin Holland. Tying up with him in an upper body clinch, not the easiest path to success. Kevin is the perfect fighter for us, Phil, because he's like the only guy that we adore that there is virtually zero pressure to sadness hedge. Mm-hmm. If anything, the opposite. You will allow your bias to make you pick him when he shouldn't be favored, because there's something inherently low stakes about the idea of Kevin Holland, title contender. Like, who cares? Kevin barely cares. Just pick him. Okay, well, UFC 272. Strange card, but really not a bad one. Overall, I think there's actually quite a bit of depth on the undercard here, too. A couple of matchups that I really couldn't give a shit about, but also quite a few that I'm looking forward to. Main event, it is a weird one, but is a compelling fight that I look forward to seeing as many of the 5 rounds scheduled as we get. Barboza Mitchell, meaningful if relatively easy to pick. Hopefully a couple of these matchups give us some surprises as well. There's a couple of them that seem, that and RDA Moicano seem like straightforward picks, but both have some potential for something weird to happen as well. So that'll do it for our main episode this week. I will say once again that if you want to hear more from this undercard and any discussion we may have of Makhachev versus Green and its undercard, you should head over to the Heavy Hands Patreon, where for $3 a month you can hear that and all of our other bonus episodes. And in the meantime, check out Phil and I on Twitter. We post lots of provocative photographs, so I mean check out in the most literal sense. Phil at Evil Greg Jackson. Make sure you navigate to his profile and click on the media tab to see the juiciest pics. and find me at Boxing Bush, BUSCH. We will catch you next week when, in addition to recapping Covington Masvidal, we will also be looking forward to Santos Ankalaev. Hey, that card's also got Sadiq Youssef, Alex Caceres. That's a weird fight. Marlon Moraes versus Song Yadong. Also kind of weird but interesting. Ricky Glenn, Drew Dober. Cool. JJ Aldrich, Jillian Robertson. Cool. Yeah, you know what? Not a bad card. So we'll see what it looks like next week when we get to it. And like I said, Phil, at some point we're going to do boxing and some kickboxing and some non-UFC cards as well. But we may not be in desperate need for the time being. Got a couple of interesting cards back-to-back here. Anyway, however it shakes out, we'll talk to you about it next week. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.